Okay, we're looking here at the CNN Health website, and it tells you that DNA discovery reveals genetic history of the ancient Egyptians. They have a small video presentation. Let's go ahead and watch this, I guess. Let me zoom in on it. Mummy DNA reveals unexpected history. Researchers in Germany have decoded the genome of ancient Egyptians for the first time. The study tested preserved mummy remains from an archaeological site along the Nile River, way down here, and they tested it versus compared to the modern DNA of modern Egyptian samples of the Caucasians living in Egypt. The study found that the mummy's closest ancient relatives were actually the Near East and Europeans. Modern Egyptians share much more DNA with sub-Saharan populations than they did back then, and it's a small percentage as it is. And that the findings have turned years of theory on its head, causing Egyptologists to now reevaluate the region's ancient history. There's one caveat, though. All our genetic data was obtained from a single site in Middle Egypt and may not be representative of all of ancient Egypt, although it was the graveyard for all of ancient Egypt at the current time that they were looking at it, attested to off in scrolls. So this has set people on their ears somewhat, a little bit. And so let's look at this story, if I can get this to reset itself right. Ancient Egyptians and their modern counterparts share less in common than you might think, that is, at least genetically. A team of scientists have now found. Researchers from the University of Tübingen and the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History in Jena, both in Germany, have decoded the genome of ancient Egyptians for the first time with unexpected results. Publishing its findings in Nature Communications, the study concluded that preserved remains found around Abu Ser el Melek, Middle Egypt, were closest genetic relatives of Neolithic and Bronze Age populations for the Near East, Anatolia, and Eastern Mediterranean Europeans. Modern Egyptians, by comparison, share much more DNA with sub-Saharan populations. The findings have turned years of theory on its head, causing Egyptologists across the world to reevaluate the region's history while unlocking new tools for scientists working in the field. And indeed, in the past 30 years, there's been many things come up about Egypt, and of course the Negrocentric view where West Africans, now mainly in the Americas, are claiming to actually be the ancient Egyptians somehow and not the primitives that were there as enslaved in the first place. This is quite the blow to the Negrocentric view also, but there's been a lot of conjecture, and I think this is one way that genetics is able to hack through something like that. Now they really want to grab more DNA from all ancient other sites and some ancient mummies and see if they can tell the truth and difference of the two. But whenever one just looks at, if you just looked up blue-eyed Egyptians, it'll show you some of the earliest dynasties having crystal blue eyes inset in their statues and so on, and a very, very Caucasian phenotype that doesn't allow for the lies to be spread of the Negrocentrics, but they keep trying. Correcting past errors, it says, depending on which way you see it, ancient Egyptians have the privilege or ignominy of being one of the most investigated peoples of antiquity. Scientists have virtually undressed mummies, diagnosed from beyond the grave even, and exposed miscarriages and 3,000-year-old scams. Extracting genome data is a new frontier for Egyptologists, though, however, and it expands our knowledge of it, and no longer does it go into conjecture. Scientists took 166 bone samples from 151 mummies dating from approximately 1400 BC to 400 AD, going the entire stretch, extracting DNA from 90 individuals and mapping the full genome in 3 cases. A scientist at the Max Planck Institute for Science and Human History looks at jaw bones, bones, soft tissue, and teeth were all studied as part of the research, and dental morphology and things like that. They've also in ancient times been able to do craniometry on them, and also their hair. You can look under microscopes and tell what people there are and things like that, and it's always been noted that there are definitely Caucasians with Caucasians hair. The strange thing showing in a lot of those is that they actually have a dental overbite type thing that looks like it's more of the European type people, and stuff, but it couldn't be proven until genetics was shown. But also, they have a lot of contingents with red and blonde hair. In fact, this cemetery they're speaking of, oddly, has redheads all in one area, blonde-haired all in one area, and darker-haired people all in another area. And it seems that they have a breakdown that looks a lot like what you would see in modern Europe today, and it's definitely not found, or the blue-eyed contingent, near as much, if barely at all, in the current population, which all have darker features. A lot of this is brought about from the Arabic people that weren't the Egyptians, and then also the Negroid admix that they have due to their interaction with the Islamic slave trade that began like well over 900 years before the Americas were even found. But previous DNA analysis of mummies has been treated with a necessary dose of skepticism, though, explains Professor Johannes Krauss of the Max Planck Institute. When you touch a bone, you probably leave more DNA on the bone that's inside it, he argued. Contamination is a big issue, and people have claimed it. Only in the last 5-6 years has it become possible to actually study DNA from ancient humans, because we can now show whether DNA is ancient or not by its chemical properties. They have ways of testing, and they can tell you if it's a fallacy, if it's like, oh, well, it's contaminated, and so on. And so many early tests were said to be contaminated. Every one of them that said European and things like that were all said to be contaminated by, of course, the European doctors that are there and so on. Although in a lot of cases they double checked and it didn't match anybody in the room or anybody known to have been on the project and whatsoever. But they weren't able to look at the ancient alleles and things and be able to tell how long ago things had happened. New genetic studies have figured out now they can tell you about what time interaction happened due to where it sets in your DNA chain. So it's amazing, and I think as this slowly gets more and more and more, we'll learn so much more about ancient histories. Indeed, I've studied from a viewpoint from pottery shards and things like that, and conjecture and moving and people having symbolism and things like that for years, and genetics is just walking right over the top of that and going, yeah, well, this is how it played out. Almost like somebody's describing a chess game to you and you can't even understand it, and somebody walks up and go, here's a picture of the game, here's what they're doing, here's where you move the queen to here. Yeah, it really does show in ease things that cannot be shown even with the longest dissertations. He tells you that heat and high humidity in tombs paired with some of the chemicals involved in the mummification processes all contribute to DNA degradation, this paper adds, but it also describes the finding as the first reliable data set obtained from ancient Egyptians. Analyzing samples spanning over a millennium, researchers looked for genetic differences compared with Egyptians today, and they found that the samples showed a strong connection with a cluster of ancient non-African populations based in east of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, Krauss describes the far-reaching data set gained from looking at mitochondrial genomes. This is not just the DNA of one person, he says. It's the DNA of the parents, grandparents, and so on, all the way, and it keeps going. He, in fact, uses parents, grandparents, and grandparents of the parents of grandparents, and so forth. So we don't find sub-Saharan African ancestry in these people. That is pretty representative, at least for Middle Egypt. Krauss hypothesized that the ancient northern Egypt would be much the same, if not more linked to the Near East, and ancient southern Egypt might be a different matter, however, where populations lived closer to Nubia, home of the Black Pharaohs in what's now is Sudan. But the Black Pharaohs in the Sudan area that we're talking about, if people know ancient archaeology, has to do with Meroe, and Meroe is again the sister of Cambyses, the Persian, and so on. And if one just looked merely at the definition of Caucasians, it'll tell you actually where they come from. Let's look into this a little bit more, though. One of the mummies analyzed as part of the study, the human remains were discovered in the 1920s by a historian studying papyrus writings, says Krauss. The genetics of the Abu Sir el-Melek community did not undergo any major shifts during the 1300 time span that we studied, said Wolfgang Hock, a group leader at the Max Planck Institute. And I believe I've got an actual interview with himself in one of my other videos. What they were looking at and looking for here, people, because they've got genetics pretty well done here, is they didn't just want to go bing. What they wanted to see is through the ages how it changed, because there were many conquests that happened, but Egypt was left fairly untouched. And then there was a Persian, a Kushite influence, and then Greeks, and then Romans. And they wanted to see that change and the genetic differences between each one and how it staggers through. And they thought that this would glean a whole lot of important information, maybe for genetics of the world. And what they found is no. Well, these people seem to be pretty much static, and it doesn't seem to change very much all the way through until real late. And that's leading into the people that are here now who really aren't genetically connected to all of the dynasties that lead before. This period covered the rule of Alexander the Great from 332 BC, the Ptolemaic dynasties, and part of the Roman rule too. Strict structural structures and legal incentives to marry along ethnic lines with these communities may have played a part in the Egyptians' genetic stasis, this paper speculates. A lot of people have assumed foreign invaders brought a lot of genetic ancestry into the region. People would say that nowadays, and whenever people say, "Oh, well, no, that's later. That's white people showing up later." Anyhow, a lot of people have assumed those foreign invaders, and that people expecting that through time, though, would become more European. But we would see the exact opposite as they show through their genetics. In other words, it was European, and then it slowly at the end faded off to be mixed with non-European, and then now non-European. Modern Egyptians were found to inherit 8% more ancestry from African ancestors than the mummies that are studied too. The paper incites increased mobility along the Nile, increased long-distance commerce, and the era of trans-Saharan slave trade is a potential reason why that may have happened. The team's findings do come with one obvious caveat, though. All our genetic data was obtained from the single site, as I said, in Middle Egypt. It may not be representative of all of Egypt, but yet it really is. And so when you see somebody have a picture like this and say these were the ancient Egyptians, they were not. They were not even really related to them. In fact, only in the late stages are they a small admix of the people that are currently living in that area. While the study might be limited in scope, the team believes it has made some technical breakthroughs. I expect there will be a ton of ancient Egyptian money genomes mapped in the next couple of years. And indeed, he's trying to get it done, and I believe he's being extremely hampered by the people that are there. Like, what this tells you is Zahiwas is not related to the people that he keeps touting, the ancient Egyptian. He's not related to those. He's living there now, but he's not related to them. And this is the thing that's been trying to be hidden for so many years, and a few latter generations. You look at some early articles early on, and people were quite confused, thinking that the people living there now were maybe, and there's a lot of conjectures, and a lot of negrocentrics like to use whenever people were confused, and anyone they can pick out of there and go, see? And well, now we're kind of able to go, well, no, see? So Krauss said, adding that multiple groups are following his team's lead. So let's hope that they're working on the mummies that we have access to, knowing which ages they came through, and they can use these exact same methods to ensure that they are strict and they are actually the non-tainted genomes. There's always more research we can do. This is not the end, but it's just the beginning. And in reality, they really haven't done much of this type of study and up to this level of depth. And I'm wondering whether any of that's going to actually be able to come on past this point here. And there's no more on that article there, but a lot more CNN articles show up. So ancient tombs and stuff. And if you look, they're Caucasians. And through all the art, and of course they show you tanned males and pale females. Well, people don't realize, well, who has that red ochre and the tan and the pale female thing? Well, that's ancient Caucasians. You can look at the Greeks, and they did this. Yeah, everybody knows the Greeks and pale. They were no, the males are shown. People that get out in the sun get tans. Look, I'm quite tanned. So here, let me show you something else here. So when we talk about Caucasians, so you can look at Caucasians here. Let's just look at the Caucasian race. Where did the Caucasian race go? I mean, was it just in the Caucasus Mountains? No, that was just a holotype skull somebody found a long time ago and goes, this is so old, and it looks like, yeah, this must be like the area they came from. Anyhow, a lot more is known now. The Caucasian race is a grouping of human beings historically regarded as biological taxon, which, depending on which of the historical race classification used, have usually included some or all of the ancient modern populations of Europe, Western Asia, Central Asia, South Asia into northern India, North Africa, and the Horn of Africa. And in between the North Africa and the Horn of Africa is the Egyptica. So let's look at something else. So when he talked about ancient Ethiopians, like Greeks and so on, where Greeks made up the name and it means sunburnt face, black people try to use that and say it's a term for ancient black people because the Ethiopians living there have a high Negroid admix. Well, it's really about 40% Caucasian admix on average in places that even have as high as 50 or over, but that's okay. And a lot of that's happened from other things. But, whenever you take the Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey and all the ones that they show and stuff, actually everywhere that's brown on this map was called Ethiopians at one time. And down here, what it doesn't show on this map is the Indians were actually called the Eastern Ethiopians, the south part of India, which is not even done correctly either. This map also reveals to you back at this time they didn't even know that sub-Saharan Africa existed. Yeah, they were well versed in all the other areas. One people that probably did back then was the Phoenicians, for they had traversed around the whole way, and it seems like the Phoenicians had a lot of maritime secrets that passed on for a long, long time, quite often shown in maps as dragons and thought you were going to fall off the end of the world and crazy things. Whenever we knew the world was round long, long ago, ancient Greeks and so on knew it, and that's in a lot of my other videos where it shows it and everything, so that idea that was really kind of an odd conjecture, I guess you'd say. Let me go one more place. So I'm just going to go to Google, and I'm going to type in blue-eyed Egyptians. Just straightforward. And of course it's going to show you stuff down here. And new research shows some Egyptians were naturally blue-eyed, blondes, brown-haired, and everything. Ooh, I guess I'll do that. Ooh, here's one of my videos. Up there's 7 Phoenician 7. Here's Super Egyptians. Let's look at images. So the follows of Horus. This guy right here is great Egyptian king Hor himself. It's not Horus, and there's Horus and Horus the Younger too, if anybody studies into it. But way back here, and this is one of the last times they do it, they have these crystal blue eyes matching the people that had that there. And you look at this guy, and he's definite Caucasian. But you look at ancient scribes, and ancient scribes have this same beautiful inlaid eyes, this lapis lazuli, and so on. And of course, this lapis lazuli comes from the Mediterranean. I've showed in some of my videos here recently how the endemic people that lived in this area were actually mixed with the Caucasians. Both groups come from Sumeria in ancient times, and that's where the Shimsu Hor and the followers of Horus had come from. Nefertiti was a big thing for a long time, and blacks like to try to claim it too in some situation. Even though she's missing her one eye, she still has one bluish hazel eye still in the other socket, which kind of shows the truth. Recently they came out with a bust recreation of her that recreates that in a way to where you can you would say in a more natural setting, and it threw a lot of controversy, especially into the blacks. They're always constantly saying like they were people of the Bible and stuff now, and they were the Egyptians and stuff, and they really were just the West African primitives of the African slave trade, which again started, I guess the Islamic portion of that started well over 900 years before the Americas were even found. But most of them were castrated and used as eunuchs and stuff, and then therefore didn't pass along a lot in itself. But you can see her blue eye left in here. If I come in onto it, you can see that it's At certain angles, it looks a little more greenish too, and it's weird how they did the background and how they stuck them to this. I've got a video coming up where it talks about the technology they used back then and how they kind of lost it after that. They even used shell inserts over here, and in some later cases, they found rocks with a pinkish vein into them, and they used those around the eyes so it actually looked more realistic. It's incredible, but very close to the blue that's over here. And famous Nefertiti, and which means beauty comes to us. And a lot of people will tell you that she didn't even come from there, that there was mixings between all of the ancient Caucasians of that area. And Amarna tablets will tell you about the mixing that had happened there too. They even try to claim, believe it or not, Cleopatra. And Cleopatra's well into the Ptolemaic dynasty. She's a Greek. And I had a guy recently tell me that, well, her sister was black, and it's like, well, how is that going to work? At best, you're begging for a mulatto to come out of the family somehow, but that's not rational reality. If you look at the ancient border steles, it'll tell you that blacks weren't even really allowed into Egypt. They were considered vile, troglodytes, all these things they had said about them, so it's terrible to actually see people grip and lie like that. Blonde-haired, auburn-haired, red-haired mummies, including Ramses himself, totally genetically tested, all of these ancient things, and mummy sites, oddities that are found inside of that, definitely. Get something like Hamites. Let's go to that. It's biblical and also it's an area. So if we look at Hamites, and you can see on the map here, well, I guess you probably couldn't from there. On the map here, it'll show you that all of above the Sahara was considered Hamites. And then down in here were Hottentots and so on, right? So Hamites, from the biblical Ham, is a historical term of ethnology and linguistics for a division of the Caucasian race and the group of related languages those populations spoke. The appellation Hamitic was applied to Berber, Cushitic, and Egyptian branches of the Afro-Asiatic languages, which together with the Semitic branch formed the Hamo-Semitic languages. However, since these three Hamitic branches have not been shown to form an exclusive or monophyletic phylogenetic unit of their own, separate from other Afro-Asiatic languages, linguistics no longer use the term in this sense, and so now the Afro-Asiatic languages spread all the way across through Mesopotamia, and it's not something exclusive to Egypt, including cuneiform, which came from Sumeria, as we've talked about too before. Each of these branches is now instead regarded as an independent subgroup, and the nomenclature of these Hamites, let's just, I guess, beginning in the 19th century, scholars generally classified the Hamitic race as a subgroup of the Caucasian race, along with the Semitic race. This was trying to give you Hamites, Semites, and Japhethites, and everything was trying to be shown as the world really is a biblical model, when in reality, science has proven it doesn't follow that correctly. But this grouping of the non-Semitic populations native to North Africa and the Horn of Africa, which I showed you Caucasians were endemic to the Horn of Africa, including the ancient Egyptians. According to the Hamitic theory, this Hamitic race was superior to more advanced than the Negroid populations of sub-Saharan Africa, and indeed the Nubians themselves. This was in its most extreme forms in the writing of C.G. Skellman. His theory asserted that virtually all significant achievements in African history were the work of Hamites or Caucasians that were all across North Africa, through the Horn and so on, and later had been brought to them. Now you can still see primitives running around in a lot of areas, like the Khoisan and things, but they were all work of Hamites who had migrated into Central Africa as pastoralists, bringing new customs, languages, technologies, and administrative skills with them. In the earliest 20th century, theoretical models of Hamitic languages and of Hamitic races were intertwined. Now, recently, we have actually found out that through the Green Sahara Project, that even down deep into the Sahara here, there were ancient Caucasians that were living there, and they've done a genome study of them, and I've got a video coming out about it. 7 Phoenician 7 had made one recently too, that pins it down. She's more the geneticist. I will just be basically showing her data in the middle of one of my videos. Peace. Anyhow, So this nomenclature, though, gradually fell out of favor between the 1960s and 1980s. I wonder why. And in large part due to its perceived association with colonial paternalism. Oh. The populations of Hamitic ancestry stock are now just more commonly called as Caucasoid. So Caucasoid or Caucasian, the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Horners that were there before the Ethiopians we talk about now, and all through North Africa always were, all the way through to the Berbers and so on. In fact, if we look at the ancient look of Ethiopia itself, we can actually see that they didn't even know sub-Saharan Africa existed, as liberated on this model here, and it used to be called Libya, actually. Later, this area got trapped into be calling Libya, and the rest of it is called Africa. Africa was also named after a Caucasian man from North Africa in those times, right towards the end, whenever we did find out sub-Saharan Africa actually did exist. Wasn't much later than that we found out that the other side of the planet existed too, but then ancient data we're showing on that shows that Caucasoid forms had come across to the Americas predating the Indians that we talked about in the Bering Ice Strait, and that we've always believed in that Clovis first idea, or that was shoved upon us. And but that's for another video. Anyhow, guys, like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. But yeah, here we show the genetics of the ancient Egyptians, what the Ethiopians meant back in the day versus what people see today and try to put together, for they weren't in any way, shape, or form connected. And then again, the primitive West Africans of the Atlantic slave trade really had nothing to do with any of this, nor the Bible. But that's, I guess, for other videos too. Like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy. Peace.